Good day, Alice. How are you, my friend? My new friend.
I am doing great, Kendra. Thank you. How
I
are you?
think I think we met a total of what, 30 seconds ago, so this is perfect. I'm good. I love connecting. So this is kind of the perfect way to spend my time. First off, thank you very much for reaching out to me, introducing yourself to me. I'm excited feels like the wrong word to hear your story, but at the same time I am because I'm somebody who firmly thinks that Um, pain and suffering can bring us a lot of beauty and growth in life. And so, to everyone out there, just be conscious. And I've shared this already, but just be conscious. This story is one of grief and one that many have experienced. But please be assured that that is going to be part of this journey. So, Alice, first off, I would love for everybody to just know who you are. Where did you grow up? What's your story?
Sure, thanks. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States, and I was the youngest of four kids. My parents are very much older, and I'm lucky to have them still with me. They're 93 and 88.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
incredible.
yeah. And I went to Chicago to get a degree in journalism from Northwestern University, and I worked as a newspaper reporter for about 10 years, which
Very cool.
I think has kind of helped me to be a little analytical about what I went through and be able to remember it and be objective about it and kind of retain the important things that I want to share with other people. I think a
Okay.
lot of times we go through something really heavy, it's like just tunnel, you're just going through it.
Makes
But
our
my
world small.
Right, yeah, but my training fortunately helped me kind of remember and write. I'm just trained to write, so I just wrote just as my own therapy, and then I ended up with this really interesting transcript of all the things that happened during that time, and, so I lived in Chicago for a while. I moved back to Columbus, Ohio after my first child was born, and I'm here now today with, 2 boys who are 20 and 18, and yeah, I own a marketing agency, so we do website design, that kind of thing. And then I
Lovely.
also do a bunch of work in the community with economic development and community building and things like that.
Amazing. Amazing. So I mean, I want to dive right in
Yeah.
because that's why we're here. And this is not an easy story to tell, I imagine, and it's not an easy one to hear. I just feel the need to share that one more time. Um, you have a very, I want to use the word tragic grief journey to share. And I'd love to really hear about that story and go from there.
Yeah. Thanks. I will dive right in and share. So, uh, I'll just to set up that this isn't the father of my kids we're going to be talking about. So I was divorced in about 10 years ago and met someone new, and we were together about 9 years. And he was an anxious, depressive kind of guy.
Hmm.
But of course, we had laughs together and we had great times and we enjoyed hiking in nature. And um, he was always his major anxiety was about work. He was in the IT field. And
Hmm.
so every time he had a job change, it was like this huge amount of anxiety. And um, he had gotten a job and he was like starting to master it, but always felt like he wasn't doing well enough. And um, around this time, December of 22, um, he was laid off from that job along with a number of other people.
Hmm.
And it was horrific for him personally. I mean, I don't think it would have been horrific for us to weather as a couple. Like for me, I'm like, I don't need to go to nice restaurants all the time. I'm making money. Like we'll manage. You'll find another
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
But for him, it was like a real blow psychically and just to his self worth. And anytime he had a big challenge, he kind of went into this like spiral of just the same thoughts over and over, and it was like very hard to bring him out. And
Mhm.
anyway, so that was going
Did he
on.
seek
It
support
was
for that? Did he
He had a therapist that he saw weekly. He was opposed to medications that might have provided some support. Um, he would, like any of us, like when we know what would be good for us, sometimes is when we lack the ability to go do the thing that's good for us.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, um, yeah, so that was around Christmas. And then I spent as much time. So I was living back and forth between, I had a house where my kids lived, and they always stay there. And then their dad would come half the time. And when their dad was there, I would come live with Daniel. And so I was with Daniel about half the time, but it was the holidays and the schedule was a little more open. So I just spent more time with him because he really, like, obviously needed that.
Mhm.
Um, and, to be honest, I was really sort of getting like at the end of my rope a little bit. I need a break from you. Like,
Yeah.
um, your feelings are valid. It's not that you're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just like, for me to be a good support to you, I'm gonna, you know, take a day this weekend and go hiking with the kids.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did that. And when I came back from that, I couldn't reach him, and I came over to the house. It was a Sunday morning, and you know, keyed into the door. And like, as soon as my hand was on the doorknob, I was like, "This, like, something's not right over here."
Mhm.
And the house was cold and very quiet. And he had taken some poison that he had very carefully researched, and I think he actually had on hand for years. Um, just kind of waiting for the moment when
Mhm.
it was just too bad to take it any. He just couldn't take it anymore. Just he kept saying, like, I just want to stop feeling this way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want this to stop. Like, you know, I can't get enough hugs or enough comforting words or enough phone calls. It doesn't make it feel any better. And so, yeah, came around the corner into the TV room and found him on the couch. And um, it was just, there are so few moments in life where you can't go backward. You can't undo it. There's nothing you can do. It's just like, this is
Mhm.
the situation. Like, he's not alive now.
Yeah.
And there's like nothing I can do to change it. Nothing. Like, it's all, no matter how tired I thought I was, or I couldn't, I needed a break. It's like, but I could have probably given a little more, but now I can't. Now it doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
I
So, yeah.
sorry, first off, I just wanna say I'm sorry because there's nothing in this world ever that can prepare somebody for that. Um, as a first responder even, I'm somebody who's walked in on that scene more than once, and nothing prepares you for that, and when it's somebody you love and when it's somebody that you are connected to, the depth of that is so complex, and I'm so sorry that you had to live that experience on so many levels. And that's one thing I do want to talk about is really the complexity of losing somebody in that way, and losing somebody to suicide. Um, because I think that exactly what your initial reaction just was is so common and heartbreaking to hear the expression of it. Because I mean, rationally I can sit here and I can assure you that you that's out of your control, that's somebody else's
Right.
actions. But I also know that rationally those words aren't going to land in a place that necessarily is going to negate that feeling for you, and I honor that and I appreciate that. But can you talk a bit more about that, the complexity of that kind of pull between the tragedy of loss and the sense of guilt maybe that comes with it?
Yeah, there is a lot to, I think every kind of grief has its own journey and
Mhm.
its own complexities. And suicide grief was there's the guilt thing, which in a way is almost like an ego trip, like I could have fixed it, or
Yeah,
there were
exactly.
many people in our lives who reached out who were like, "Oh, I was going to send him a text message," and I could reassure them and say like, "There's no way that that would have changed anything." Like
Yeah.
if all the things I was doing didn't change anything, like you sending or not sending a text message on a particular day was
Mhm.
not going to make a difference. Not to say that it couldn't have or something. That's not to say that we shouldn't all support everyone as best we can, right? But
Certainly.
and then in a way, like at the time, just because I was angry about everything all the time, I was offended by that too. Like really, you think it was like your text message was gonna, really? Um, but but I think about suicide grief, the things that are important to share are this really strange trade-off where the person who died that you're sad that they're gone is also the person who killed the person you loved, right? Like it was their choice, it was their hand. And so if Daniel had been killed by someone who was homicidal, I could have this like very pure rage of like, what a horrific evil individual who could do this. But to hold both of those things, to like love and miss this person and know that they were capable of taking themselves away,
Mhm.
um, it's tough to hold both of those things. It's tough, and I felt like the point of success, if there's if there's an achievement in the grief journey, the point where I felt like, okay, I have reached a point of inflection here, is when my sense of loss and my grief was actually stronger than my sense of anger,
Yeah.
not even just at Daniel, but yeah, like I was more sad than I was angry at him.
Yeah.
Um, there's
And
just
does
so much anger, and I don't know if it was personal to me. I think it was common based on the people in my suicide grief support group, but
yeah.
um, yeah, everything around the house that I was then going through all his things at first, kind of on a mission of solving a mystery in a way, because I didn't know what he had taken. I didn't know when he had obtained it. I didn't know he left the house the night before, and I couldn't figure out where he went, all this stuff. Um, but I'm just going through papers, and there's all these little papers like, like meditate every day and go for more walks with Alice. And it was like, I was so mad. Like you knew what to do, and you
Yeah.
didn't do it. And um, so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of anger in that this particular brand of grief that might be equivalent to what you'd have with like a crime or like a preventable accident, but
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I've experienced that with um a preventable accident, somebody who had made some negligent choices and ended it ended up costing them their life. And certainly I think that that would be the closest I could say in terms of relating to this type of grief specifically. Um, the frustration that comes with, well, actually, I want to go back. You said something that I'm completely blown away by the notion of it, but I think it's so valid. And you said it was a bit of an ego trip to think that I could have been the difference, that I could have, and I think that that's something that's really important to share a bit more about, because I think that we as people, especially with the people we love, we think we have this innate ability to affect them in a way that doesn't truly exist. We don't truly have the ability to affect change for somebody else. We can certainly be supportive. We can share information. We can share education. We can be willing to walk alongside and show up with. But ultimately, I think you nailed that, and I think that it's really how did that sit with you when you figured that out? And how long did it take you to get to that? Because I imagine that there was certainly a period of, in that investigation process, in that contemplation process, how many times did you put a check on the other side that was, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this, before you realized the main one, which is I couldn't have done any of that.
Yeah, I love that question. Um, I think when my viewpoint was focused on, like, a week or a month, the period between the layoff and when he died,
Mhm.
it was, like, all these things that I could have done, right? Like, I could have brought him breakfast more often or, all these things. But when I started going through his things and I found this journal that he had kept in college, and it really broadened my view to, like, the whole scope of his life as an adult and, like,
Mhm.
the way that he thought about things and the way he reacted to, you know, some girl he had a crush on, not dating him or all these things and his
Yeah.
parents. And it was, like, so clear that we create these narratives about our own lives that are fairly unrelated to the facts. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I was reading this journal, and, by the time we had met, he was 40, late 40s, um, maybe even early 40s, but definitely 40s. And, he had this story that, like, his growing up years were miserable and his parents were horrible and, all these various things that shaped him as a person. And I was like, "Oh, wow, that's really sad, and, like, I'm sorry that
Mhm.
your mother didn't love you and, your father was harsh and
Yeah.
transacted, affection for performance and all these things," right? And then I'm reading these letters back and forth with his parents that did not match up with that at all, like, he wrote this letter to his father about the animals on campus and the birds and the flowers, and it was just spoke of this real relationship that they had that was deep and joyful. And I thought, like, man, he really got invested in this story that then became, like, narrower and narrower and narrower
Mhm.
until he kind of
Mhm.
blame everything on that. And then it was clear that, like, yeah, you're right. Well, exactly what you're saying. Like, nobody can
No.
get their hands in there and change that. That's a person programming their own mind to be happy or unhappy. And people with no resources can be very happy, and people with everything can be very unhappy, as we see in the news all the time. So it's yeah, I mean, I can't make my own kids happy. I can only choose for myself to have joy and contentment,
Mhm.
and I can't you can't force someone else.
Yeah. And I think something that you said there, as somebody who lives with my own mental health struggles and does so very openly and has for years, and something that I try to share very explicitly often, which is that focus piece you're talking about. It's very easy to narrate a story and pick out the negative. It's very easy to look at something that you connect to emotionally and allow that to become your entire view of a situation, whether it's realistic or not. And I think that that's where people who are struggling really need to pay attention, because ultimately you can have the from an outward perspective the worst experiences in life happen to you and still be a happy person. And it's truly about training your mind to respond differently. And as you just expressed, he seemingly trained his mind to focus in on the hopelessness, which is tragic and sad. And I don't take it lightly, because it's a struggle that a lot of people have, and it's one that is not easy to manage or overcome. But certainly there are many resources and tools to enable us to do that, which then brings me to my next point in what you've shared is how insulting, how patronizing. What is that period of time for you to then kind of work through that list of, like, your finding notes, meditate, your finding notes, connect, go for walks, be social, get out, be active, all of the right things, exactly the right things, the things that make living with grief and any negative situation tolerable, doing the right things over and over consistently. So, what's that period for you? What's that period of, like, just how patronizing to sit here and recognize that cognitively he is aware. Cognitively he knows. Here is proof and evidence that he had knowledge that could have changed this for him. Yet through life experience and sitting there next to this person whom you love and you're trying to support and ultimately are getting frustrated by, which we will talk about. But how long to get through that piece where it's just like, okay, this is going to torture me if I continue to focus on the fact that he could have done differently.
Mm. I think somehow I was very fortunate that the timing of things lined up in a good way for me. So Daniel he had certainly had suicidal ideations in the past, and
Mhm.
he had, before he met me, had a couple of attempts. And it seemed like, oh, he's growing and maturing and like he's sort of outgrown this kind of thing, right? But but he did have a very specific idea of what his memorial service would look like. And every time we went to one of my family members who would have like a very traditional funeral home situation, he would be like, "Oh, I can't stand this. Like, I don't want this, and this is what I want, and I want people to be self-expressed and authentic, and I want it to be a party, and I want there to be organic food." And I was like, okay. So, you know,
Taking notes.
right. So, he had it all written down, of course, but,
Yeah.
I knew also. So, when I was planning the memorial, I knew I needed some time to make it be like that, and that gave me time to get my thoughts together, and I wanted to write something for people to have, because when I was calling to tell people the news, which was a really tough couple of weeks
Mhm.
of, calling everybody, um there wasn't really anyone else to do it. I mean, I suppose I could have outsourced that. People would say like, "Oh, why don't you just give a friend that list or something?" But that didn't. Then I have to call the friend first. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just every um, step was like, okay, but I have to do that. And um, I'll just take a little detour. That part was difficult because people's reaction to suicide death is so strong, and there's such a shock, and kind of all the other things, fear and uh, anger and everything else that I went through. And I didn't wanna just kinda, like, lay it on somebody in the first sentence, right? So
Mhm.
I found myself being really careful and kind of learning how to ask if, I have something difficult to share. And, of course, if it was his friend and I was calling instead of him, it was kind of clear there was something really wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the conversations were just really tough, and that just I felt like I was weathering the other person's reaction, like it was coming out of the phone at me, and I would have to sort of brace myself. And so that was happening over and over. But as I was doing that, I felt like I owe people a more measured explanation, because so many of so many of the people who felt they were close to him were blindsided. And then they felt like, oh, I wasn't really his friend, because how could I have
Yeah.
not known things were
Yeah.
this bad?
Yeah.
Um, so I wrote this essay, and in the course of writing the essay, which I printed out and handed out at the memorial service, or I had it on a table, it was just digesting it for myself. And so I think that was about 2 months. The memorial was in
Yeah.
March. He died in January. So it gave me about that much amount of time to be able to analyze and sift through and express that this was his growing up experience, or his interpretation of his growing up experience.
Mhm.
These were the ways in which the deck was somewhat stacked against his mental health, and the way it was perpetuated. And in the end, after seeing how much courage it took to get up every day and go to work for him, and how much
Mhm.
anxiety he battled to, get to his first meeting of the day, that I admired the courage it took for him to get up every day for all the days that he did that. And I know
Mhm.
it took courage not to get up.
Mhm.
It took courage for him to drink what he drank,
Mhm.
and that he really wanted peace. He wanted to not be battling that, and that's what he chose. And I I I can not like it, but I can respect that that's a valid choice.
Mhm.
Um, for him inside of the context that he had created inside of his thoughts of what he thought was possible, which I knew was not actually what was possible. Like, of course, there
Yeah.
was a possibility of having a happy, joyful life
Yeah.
and finding another job or changing our lifestyle completely. All those things were all
Mhm.
possible, but inside of the rigidity in which he was at that moment, those things weren't possible, and he made a choice that he's allowed to make.
Yeah, and which is tragic, and I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who, there's so many pieces there for interpretation, and I mean, I'm first off, I mean, bless you for holding space and offering the gift of holding that space for his friends and the connections in truly trying to honor him by sharing with some completion and openness for other people's experiences, because that's heavy. That's a lot, and that's a lot to carry and to take on. And as prepared as you think you are to do that, and as prepared as you are um, to hold space for it, you're never prepared for the aftermath. You're never prepared for the energy it takes. And I find that with suicide, similarly to some other more unique, or I'll say shocking, um, griefs, you almost end up being the support, which is so unfair. You end up being the one that has to hold space and make it okay for the people you're sharing with, and that's a burden
Mhm.
that you should never have. And I find that that's one that is unique to suicide, because there's this necessity, I think, for loved ones or for people who have connection to the person lost, to honor that legacy and to um, give assurance that there's still meaning and that they were still valid, and this wasn't a weakness and this wasn't a failure. Um, and that being said, also, I do agree with you that there is another way. And unfortunately, there are illnesses that end in death. That's just the reality of life. Um, and that doesn't exclude mental illness. And it's unfortunate that we get into this black and white thinking that is, well, they gave up. That's because I don't think it's that simplistic. I also don't think that it's the option that I would ever recommend or choose or support. But I accept the fact that it is reality for some people, and it's a reality that people are then forced to live with after the fact. Um, so a huge amount of respect to you for being able to hold space for others, and in all likelihood, what would have felt like carrying others through the experience that you were probably one of the most primarily affected by. And that's an interesting journey to walk. Um, that frustration from other people, what did that what did that cause in you? Were you able to respond to that in a way that was accepting? Was it maddening to you to hear people's frustration? Were you able to place that, or did that have an effect on you?
Hmm. I think I just felt a little bit alone, like
Yeah.
that there were so many friends in so many different circles who didn't know him.
Mhm.
And I also wondered how often I don't really listen to people, because I heard him on the phone with people, or he would say, I told this friend this about how I'm feeling, and he was somewhat dismissive or whatever like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then people would be surprised, right? Like, I didn't even know he was depressed. And I was like, how could that be?
Yeah.
But then I think probably there are people in my life who are trying to communicate something to me. And I do this too, where I downplay something to sort of test.
Yeah.
Like, if I have something going on with me, I'll kind of like slyly mention it in the most quiet possible voice in a sort of
Yeah.
veiled reference. And if the person doesn't pick up on it, I'm like, well, that wasn't for them. Then they can't help me because they're not tuned in.
Mhm.
And so I suspect that happened a lot, or we as humans are just not particularly great great listeners, or we don't know what to do, so
Yeah.
we just skip over that information that we can't process or
I
support with.
I'm gonna take the reins on that one for 1 second and call myself out on this, just because I know this to be true, and I think it goes both ways. I think that there's certainly the opportunity that exists, which is people aren't often present in the way we want them to be. And when we communicate with people, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not on the other end doing something else or dealing with their own lives. And so, first off, I think that there's always that possibility. I also think that a lot of people don't know how to respond and it's uncomfortable and we don't like uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Discomfort is like it's absolutely not acceptable in our lives. We push away from discomfort. And something I always tell people when somebody confides in you or when you know somebody's struggling is there is a huge benefit to offering to show up with. There's a huge benefit to saying, look, dude, I don't have a clue how to respond to that, but like, what can we do? What would make you feel better? And instead of that deference, instead of that, you know, instant feeling of, I can't carry this, so I'm not going to. But then I'm going to
Mhm.
flip it on you for 1 second and say this. When we tiptoe into asking what it is we need, we often don't truly ask for what we need. And I think that that's something that I'm constantly on this journey to learn. Like I want to grow, and something that I've recognized very recently, having just been through a very complex and heavy 2 years myself. um really shit at asking for what I need. I'm really not great at just saying like, I am sad today and I don't want to be sitting here alone, could you please come sit with me? That's just it's we as people, we don't do the easiest thing. We create this scenario. I just listened to you describe it. I'm going to tiptoe into a suggestion that maybe, and then if they bite, maybe I'll share more if I feel like they're ready to respond the way I need them to. And I think that's something we need to learn as people, and especially when it comes to things as important as this, is that we can't have an expectation of somebody else's reaction. We can simply express clearly and communicate clearly what we need and what the ask is. And then if somebody chooses to respond in a way that's unacceptable, we have the opportunity then to manage ourselves in respect to the truth as opposed to what we perceive it to be and assume it could have been. So that's just my 2 cents worth on that.
Right, and I am curious why it feels like such a vulnerable position. It's as if I sort of hint around that I might need something and then my friend gets it wrong, then I'm not as hurt, but if I say, "I really would like it if you could just come over and, like, be in my kitchen while I'm making dinner, and you don't need to say anything or bring anything with you. I just want someone breathing the same air as me." And then they say no to that, that hurts so much more because I was specific and I put it out there, and I'm not really sure why that hurts so much more than the
I
more vague way, but it feels so much more vulnerable to really ask for
It
the thing that I
is.
want.
It is because to ask the thing you want, you're admitting that you have a need. You're admitting that there is a help or a support required. So that is vulnerable. It is very vulnerable. And I when I say like I'm actively in this, I mean as recently as yesterday, I had a conversation with a friend of mine and it sucked. It absolutely sucked. I haven't it's a friend that doesn't live close to me, and I happen to be doing an event where they live in a couple of months, and I had reached out twice and I was kind of like, "Hey, gonna be in the area if you want to grab a coffee," and didn't really get an answer. And so right away, you start creating your own story. There's
Mhm.
already a narrative. I'm like, oh my gosh, she hates me. She doesn't want to talk to me anymore. She doesn't want to be my friend. What did I do? And then I made the mistake of going on Instagram and I realized she wasn't following me anymore. And I'm like, okay, now I feel like a 12-year-old,
Oh,
right? Like
man.
now I'm like, this is
Right.
this juvenile. And my past self, and again, I'm talking yesterday. So this is like new lessons I'm sharing with you. My past self would have then continued to write that story. and I would have sat with it. I would have let it hurt me. I would have created a reason. I would have doubted myself. It would have been this unnecessary amount of energy that I was spending on hurting myself. And instead, I picked up my phone and I sent her a message because I didn't want to be intrusive. I didn't want to be like, I'm going to blindside you on the phone and be like, yo, what's up? So I sent a message and I said, look, this is a really trivial question. And I'm working really hard on communicating clearly. And this is something that just came to me. And I would really like to understand it better. So I'm just going to ask you. And I said, why are you not following me on Instagram anymore? Because that's how we initially met. That was our initial
Oh,
communication. So it's not as though that wasn't so like left field. And two, I've mentioned twice now that I'm going to be out there during this period of time and mentioned that I'd love to see you and you haven't responded. You've responded to other things, but you haven't responded to that. And I just want to know if there's a reason. And that was brave. Like that
that's very
took
brave. Yes.
everything in me, right? Because you feel childish, you feel embarrassed, you feel
You
vulnerable.
don't really want the answer necessarily, right?
No, because you're terrified. And I mean, you know what? But now what I've done is I've taken all of the what if and worry and made up story in my head and I've put it out there. And if she decides to say, you know what, I just don't like you anymore, I have no interest in spending time with you. Well, fine, that's going to hurt, but I'm hurting myself otherwise.
Right,
But
you
that
already made
wasn't
that
the
up
answer,
anyway.
right? Like
You're
I've
already living as
already
if
made
that's
up the
true.
worst case scenario. So
Right.
instead, what I got back to was she responded and said, I'm really happy you asked. I had to take you off my Instagram because over the past 2 years, I have very openly shared my journey that my father was dying of dementia. And I lost him 6 months ago, and during the same period of time, she lost her father and stepfather to the same illness. And she said the connection was just so strong, and because I couldn't see it. I needed to know that I was protecting myself from having to be exposed to this when I couldn't. And
Mm, mhm.
I adore you for asking. The only reason I haven't asked you or committed to anything during that time you're out here is I've just been waiting for the event planners that she's dealing with to get her the information she needs so that she could answer. And I was like, I'm so happy I
Aw,
asked. I'm so happy
yeah.
I asked. I love you, friend. Thank you so much for tolerating this odd interjection into your day. But I'm so grateful because immediate and I cried. I cried. Like I was like, wow, that's so much better. That's such a better answer than what I had come up with. And I love you and I'm sorry that it's been such a tough couple of years and I appreciate you. And I think that that's yes, we open ourselves up to potentially hearing something we don't want to hear. But then you get to deal in facts. Then you get to deal with, well, I'm really sorry. I wish you had talked to me about that. I'm really sorry. I wish that we had worked through that. But I'm no longer dealing in the fantasy of, wow, she thinks I'm the worst person in the world and she's trying to find a way to avoid me. Like, and that's great. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's my really long-winded like here's why I think it's so important to not tiptoe into those things and to genuinely and truly say, I need help or I need to do the right thing.
yeah. That's such a cool story, and it really also just happens to highlight something I learned about grief, which is this, like, engaging and disengaging from it
Yeah.
that the actual, currently subscribed to by grief researchers, um, stages of grief is really not stages, it's this oscillation of, like, active
Yeah.
grieving, and then I need to go do something else and not think about that, and then
Yeah.
I'm gonna actively engage with it, and then I'm gonna not. And, so that's really fascinating that she pointed that out of, like, I can't seem to get away, when I need to get away, I can't get away because I'm seeing you, and it brings me back to this
Yeah.
experience that I'm not
Yeah.
wanting to have at that particular moment, so
Yeah. which again also I think is a huge piece of that's okay. Like it's okay. It's okay to step away from pain. It's okay to step away from sadness, and it's necessary. I don't think we survive the heaviest and most challenging moments in life if we don't give ourselves permission to step away from that. And I think that that's it's something that unfortunately modern day we are connected in unhealthy ways. We have this whole social media that doesn't allow us to disconnect in a way that sometimes we can gain that space. And I think that that's such a huge uh, piece of acceptance that I can take away from that. Um, Now you're speaking of grief, and we're coming into a season where the world is like merry and bright, and we're going to pretend that Christmas eliminates and creates this magic that surpasses everything in life. What does Christmas look like for you? What do these big holidays look for like in grief? What are those experiences like, and how do you survive them?
Um, I think the holidays are this set of expectations. They're
Yeah.
so steeped in whatever our family traditions are, or whatever we did together, um, that they create this storyline in our minds that we're going to relive. We're going to open the cover of the book on this day, and we're going to read this page, and it's going to be familiar, and we're all going to be like, "Yay! Remember that thing?" Like when you read a kid the same book every night, and they're just looking forward to knowing what's going to happen next. And then when something's different, it's just so jarring, and all that the focus goes on the thing that's not there anymore. And it, of course, everyone's like, "Well, create new traditions." And you're like, "Yeah, but I just wanted to read the same familiar story that gave me joy." Um, so I think one thing that I learned when I was really delving in, I mean, after Daniel died, and all the feelings hit me, and they were in my body, and I was like, I've got to figure a way out of this, because I've got
Mhm.
like two kids, in at the end of high school, and I'm running a business. I have payroll, like, I
Life doesn't
can't be one
stop.
of these people who just like falls off the
Yeah.
earth for months.
Yeah.
It's not, I have responsibilities, like I'm going to figure this out. This is my project now. Like I will figure out how to grieve.
Yeah.
Um, and I came across this great work by Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote a book called The Grieving Brain. And it's her her concept, or her hypothesis, is that grief is a learning process. So you have these patterns in your mind, like you see a person. For me, I see a person in the park across the street wearing jeans and a black t-shirt, and I'm like, well, that must be Daniel, because he always wore jeans and a black t-shirt and would walk over at that park. And so it's normal for my brain to have a pattern of, when I see that, that equals this, without further investigation. And she goes really deeply into how our brain patterns form, but essentially grief is learning that that's not Daniel, and
Mhm.
that when I wake up in the morning, he's not going to be in the bed or downstairs, and that when I hear the sound of the garage door opening, that's not going to be him. And
Mhm.
so it's all of this information, all these patterns over time, and our learning process of, that's not how it is now. This doesn't match up anymore. These two things
Yeah.
aren't the same thing. This isn't going to happen again. And I think the holidays are just such a dramatic example of these very emotional stories that have so much meaning and love and joy and
Yeah.
family tradition, and then something's different about it, and it's so much more obvious that the story
Mhm.
is not going to be the same again, and we're never going to open the cover of the book and have that be the next page, because that
Yeah.
person's not there. And Daniel's not going to go to the tree lot and put the tree on top of the car with us, and he's not going to be in the Christmas card picture. And we're going to get the ornaments out of the box. And we had this, he was very secular, and we had this little joke, the kids and I, where we'd hand him all the religious ornaments, like just to kind of get his goat a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we can still laugh about that and remember it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key for the sort of most developed person in the situation is to make sure to give other people permission to do that, because of course people think like, oh, I shouldn't bring it up, or we can't
Yeah.
talk about it. And
Yeah.
um, for my kids, it's really important that I remember to make those jokes and like, hey, remember that time that happened, and kind of free up the conversation for them to be able to express what they want to express.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, holidays I feel like are just like a very amplified, emotional, colorful story. That's the same thing we run into in everyday life with grief, but just writ really large. And we're all supposed to be happy and
Yeah. Yeah.
generous, and you know.
And I think that and maybe this makes me strange, I don't know, but I over the years and through my own experiences have learned that there's happiness in grief. There's a lot of recognition and space that I hold for the truth, which is anywhere grief exists, there was love. And
Mhm.
anywhere there was love in my life, I want to embrace that with the joy it deserves. And that doesn't have to be exclusive. Both can be true. I can be extremely sad going into this Christmas. I can be extraordinarily sad that my father's not going to be here with me. My father was my best friend. There's nobody in this world that would ever second guess that. And I think back to my childhood and how magical Christmas was, and my father was meticulous in decorating. And yesterday I found myself just having this internal battle of like, I have to get the decorations up for my boys because regardless of whether or not I feel like I want this right now, regardless of whether or not it's grief that's winning right now or joy, um, he did that for me. My dad did that for me. Every Christmas, he made sure that those lights were up and that it was a magical experience. And I think the thing about holidays is it's one of the rare times in the world these days that we make time for family, that we make time for connection. And I think that's also why it's so amplified because we have an expectation to connect for holidays. And I think that we can also use that as a reminder that perhaps we need to do better at connecting outside of the holidays as well. I think maybe there's an opportunity for us to recognize that if the main memories you hold of somebody in grief are around the times that you saw them and the only times that you saw them or experienced that with presence was at a holiday, then potentially you could take a look at your day-to-day life and figure out how to be connecting with and sharing those moments with those people more frequently. um,
Mhm.
Something you had said you had written a letter. You're also a journalist by education, and 10 years experience. So how has that supported? Did you like that segue? That was good. I was
That
like,
was really good.
that
Hmm.
was just like apples to oranges, but we made it look gracious.
So
Um,
smooth.
Something like that. But I wanted to talk about this. I looked over on the table. There was a book there, and I had just written down the title of the book you had just shared from Mary Frances O'Connor. And I was thinking, writing must be a huge tool for you. It must be a huge outlet for you. And has that helped you in this? And how have you kind of leaned on that and what's come of that?
Yes, it helped a lot. It helped me to order my thoughts. I
Hmm.
mean, at the beginning, there weren't any thoughts. I've never felt so bereft of my own intellectual ability. It
Hmm.
was very frightening. I've seen, films about older people who know that they're advancing into senility and they can tell, and it's how unsettling that is. And I got a little taste of that because just the traumatic response of what happened.
Hmm.
I mean, like, I do not miss appointments. I mean, I'm one of those people with like the calendar with like the 5-minute increments and,
We are
2-minute
not the
warnings and
same.
all that. And, I would just, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to have just one work meeting just to get some normalcy. So I'm just going to have this one work meeting. It's going to be at 1. Okay, I'm going to get on a Zoom. And I mean, it just, all of a sudden it was like 1:45, and I was like, I didn't go to that. Like, what? And I couldn't solve problems or like think of anything, or it was really disturbing. So gradually being able to write about things and get my thoughts organized was really reassuring to me that I could still do that, but
Mhm.
also kind of started to create a narrative for myself, right? Like I get to create the story of what this means for me, and I can create that, it was the most horrible tragedy of my life and I'll never recover from it and it was all my fault, or I can create that this is a reminder that life is short and why have I not been going to the symphony for the last 4 years and what,
I love that.
like let's go love everybody as much as we can. And if the holidays are a time when the people I only see once a year, I see like, oh, there are fewer people at Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
and these people are getting quite a bit older, and this is an opportunity. So that was really helpful. And then I did end up writing a book. Um, I had, I don't know, it just felt like a thing to do, like some kind of way to focus and have a
Mhm.
goal. And
Mhm.
for me, my personality type was like that was a real comfort for me, like that I could still get things done. And I was like, okay, I'll have a big goal and this will be something I can focus on. So I was writing this book, just it was a memoir at first. Just all the crazy things that happened and people's different responses, what I learned about Daniel, what I learned about his childhood, what I discovered about other people, what I discovered about myself. Um, and I started writing that, and I was pretty much done with it. And then this opportunity to do a TEDx talk came up, and I applied, and I was accepted. And I was like, "Oh wow, this is really great." Um, Opportunity to share with people about the the potential to really take on grief, kind of as if physical therapy, like as a physical injury, like if
Yeah.
to decide to take it on, and if you just ignore it, you're if you have a knee injury and you just decide to not do anything and not move, just sit in a chair for 6 months, it's not going to ever get better. So,
Yeah.
um, so that was my take on the TED Talk. And then, but once I worked really, really hard on it and had a lot of coaching around it, and it was rewritten a bazillion times. And the final product was so much more about being of service to people in terms of how to show up. There's just not very much out there in the literature about how to be a good friend, or how, there's
Yeah.
a couple Facebook posts that get passed around all the time because that's it. And there's not a lot of books on how to, what do you do when your friend has something really terrible happen to them besides bring a casserole? Like, what else is there? Um,
Bring several.
right, right. Start an online meal train and have 40 people bring
Hey,
casseroles,
I am
which
not
is
I
great.
am not slamming meal trains. They saved me at one point in my life.
Yes, it was great. So I was like, "Oh, this is really what's called for in this space." Like, not the amount of people who wanna read some, like, middle-aged white woman's memoir about her husband killing himself is a small audience, but
Yeah.
the amount of people who could benefit from really talking about grief and the grief process and what people's reactions are to different attempts to support, like, that's really called for. So,
Mhm.
I ended up reframing the whole thing and leaving the narrative parts in there of things I experienced, but really
Yeah.
putting it in terms of here's where I was. This was the point at which I was just barely functional and needed Maslow's hierarchy of needs baseline things like food
Yeah.
and sleep and
Yeah.
safety. And then, later on here, I was at this point where I could take on different types of therapy, or I could go to a support group, or I wanted people
Yeah.
to recommend things. Um, and so that's what I ended up with is the book that I have now, which is currently in the publishing process. It's with my publisher, which is called Liminality Press, and it
Excellent.
is due out early in 2025.
And we will be sure to share that, and we'll also include the link and such to the book on this when that does come out. So you'll have to be sure to
Oh,
make sure that we have that information. And obviously, I'm gonna be bugging you to get one sent up here. I
well, thank
will.
you so
I will
much.
e-transfer the funds, but I want the like autographed version.
Aw, nice. Thank you.
No, I thank you. Um, I am so grateful for people who find a way to show up. And it's funny that you use those words because I think that those are probably, one of my catchphrases is definitely show up. Just keep showing up. And whether it's for yourself, whether it's for other people, People don't understand the power of presence. People don't understand the power of genuinely just truly being offering of yourself and of your time and I not having the answers. I mean, just you don't have to have the answers, and I think that that's one of the things that scares people away from participating in grief,
Mhm.
is really that fear of not knowing. It's that, "What if I say the wrong thing?" It's the, "Is it okay if I laugh? Is it okay if I crack a joke?" Or, "I'm devastated and I don't wanna make it harder for them." And I think that, again, it goes back to having that expectation of people. If we just let that go, if we just truly accept the fact that having an expectation of how somebody else is going to be affected by a situation isn't relevant. But when you are willing to sit with any possibility, you become the perfect support. You become the perfect participant in showing up for your friends, for your family, for loved ones, because ultimately you're willing to be as vulnerable and as without answer as the person who's suffering. And I don't think that that goes unnoticed. And I wonder for you, I mean, you did just kind of put a little slight on the meal train thing. Um,
No, I love meal train. I, like, forgot how to make dinner because people brought me dinners for so many weeks that I, like, just didn't cook. It was great. It was, like, exactly what was
it's
needed.
so necessary. It's like my go-to when big things happen to people that I care about. My go-to is, because of my own experience, my we lost a son years ago, and my other son was 2
Oh my
years
god, I'm
old
so
when that
sorry.
happened. Thank you. And I swear to God, if the neighborhood hadn't been delivering food, I don't think that our 2-year-old would have eaten. Like, I think it would have just been like shoving french fries down his throat until we survived and came through it. Um, but yeah, so I think, one, Maslow's hierarchy of needs has it. There's a reason it stands the test of time, is really just taking the guesswork and the work out of the day for the person who is not capable of showing up for themselves. That's
Mhm.
huge. But what made a difference for you? What made a difference? Like, what truly got you through? And I mean, I can imagine that there were 5,000 messages of support, and I am sure every
Mhm.
single one of them was appreciated. But at the end of the day, what did you feel made a big difference for you in your grief journey in terms of other people's participation?
Yeah, like you said, showing up, having people arrive sort of without permission in a way
Yeah.
that at other times would be rude.
Yeah.
But and this has been said in other places by other people, the ability to make decisions or to respond to what can I do is not there. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you can help me. I don't know what I want. Um, but when people would come over with their meal and offer to come in the house, that was great. A lot of people were sort of like, drop it on the porch and run away sort
Yeah.
of scenario because it
Yeah.
was too scary to knock on the door. But
Yeah.
when people came in, I could gauge if they didn't want to talk about that, if they didn't want to talk about Daniel or they didn't want to talk about suicide. Like, let's talk about what schools my kids are applying to. But it's just so lonely because everyone's afraid to talk about the thing. So nobody talks to me at all. And then
Yeah.
it's okay if you don't want to talk about that, but I just want
But I don't
some
want to be
friendship.
alone. Yeah.
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 Um, and so that was great. Um, I had a friend who said they were gonna be my oil change friend, like, if I needed some chore done and I just didn't have
Yeah.
the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
I didn't need my oil change, but I did need my carpets cleaned, and,
Yeah.
she didn't come over and clean them, but she just gave me one single search result, like, "Here is a person who has time
Yeah.
available tomorrow, and this is how you schedule it," and
Yeah.
that was really helpful. I had friends of Daniel's who showed up and, stayed here, which was really nice because the house was so empty and
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah.
And they just like started cleaning out they were like, "Can we clean out the refrigerator?" I was like, "Yes." Cuz
Please.
yeah, cuz it was like
Yeah.
food that he had bought and then it wasn't good anymore, but like I just I want to clean out the refrigerator, but I also don't want to open the refrigerator and see like his favorite chocolate milk in there that I'm not going to
Yeah.
drink.
Yeah.
Um that was great. Um yeah, that whole not really asking what could be done, but just either come over with an idea already and be willing for me to say, "No, I don't want you to do that."
Yeah.
But there's always something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So it was great having
Yeah.
company, great having food. Um,
I
at the
I
very beginning, I didn't know that I needed food. Like my kind of ability to be hungry was offline,
100%.
and it's actually my ex-husband, my kid's dad. He was out of state, but he came back that night. He sent neighbors over, first of all, which was a
Mhm.
very solid move. He sent his
Yeah.
parents and some neighbors to just come over and be in the house with me.
Yeah.
And then when he got home later, I was in bed, but I couldn't sleep, which is not like me. I'm a very good sleeper. I can always
Yeah.
sleep no matter what.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't sleep. And he brought me like NyQuil or something. And
Yeah.
the next day he came upstairs with a hot, like with eggs.
Yeah.
And it was like, if he had asked me, "Are you hungry or can I make you breakfast?"
Hard
I would have
no.
said, "No, like, definitely
Yeah.
not. I can't even imagine food." But when it was in front of me and it was hot and I could smell it, I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, I don't remember when is the
I
last
can
time I've
do
eaten."
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was so
Yeah.
grateful, and it was just I, like, just
It's
slurped it all down immediately. I was like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever."
yeah.
So, yeah, it is hard because as a friend, you wanna be, like, a little tentative and, like, "Oh, I don't wanna overreach or I don't wanna, like,
Yeah.
intrude," but,
Yeah.
like,
Those are
I
my
needed
favorite
people to
people.
intrude. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but it's tough too, right? Because you have this thought of how your army will come together for you. And it never works that way. This is that whole well, it's true though, and it's tough, right? Because people can be very prescribed in how they support. It's I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. People can be very uncomfortable with it. People are experiencing their own part of this loss and aren't able to show up in a way that you want them to. But ultimately, I think that exactly what you're saying, and I felt strongly that I had an idea where that conversation would go, and that is just show up. Show up and do the thing. Whatever the thing is. The thing isn't gonna fix it. Nothing's gonna fix it.
Right.
Nothing's gonna make the sad go away. Nothing's gonna make the hurt go away. Nothing is necessarily going to make me feel less helpless in this moment. But my ability to survive knowing that somebody else is there if I falter is far greater. It's far greater when I know that somebody else knows that this is the state I'm in. Then I'm a little less
Mhm.
scared about being in this state. And there is nothing comfortable about being in that state. There's nothing that you can sit with and find peace with when you are in the depth of grief. But I think that just knowing that somebody's sitting there keeping an eye on you and that can acknowledge it and that can pick up those little things. I mean, the people that I know there's a lot of people who try hard and there's a lot of people who are like checking in like, "Are you eating? You need to eat."
Mhm.
Great, but I don't care. Great, but I don't want to cook. Great, but I like I had to give myself permission in periods of great grief to accept the fact that I think I've lived on takeout for the past like year and a half, and I'm okay with it. You know, in the past year and a half, going through things with my father, I had a major surgery, dealing with some issues with my son who's diabetic, just a lot of loss and a lot of grief and a lot of big change in life. And you know what? I want to beat myself up over the fact that my kids have eaten takeout more than they should. But at the same time, my kids are being fed and they're safe and they're okay. And I'm not feeding them like, I'm not just doing the like McDonald's takeout. They like Thai and Indian too. So we're good.
That's good.
But I think that just showing up, the value of that, the value of showing up without permission. And I love that. I think that that's such a key piece to that because when people show up without permission, our sense of being loved and cared for is so
Mm,
much greater. To
yeah.
know that somebody didn't wait for me to give them permission to love me, but they
Mm,
just took it upon themselves to know that I needed that love. I think that that's priceless. That's a
yeah.
priceless and beautiful sentiment because it's to me the greatest gift you could ever offer and the greatest effort of presence that you can ever offer is to say, "You know what? You're worth my time. You are worth me being there with you.
Potentially being rejected and having you say, "I can't see you right now," or "This
And
isn't a
I'm
good,"
willing to take that chance.
willing to be courageous enough
Yeah.
to have that happen. Yeah,
I think that's
that's profound.
beautiful. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's I always love to end this on something that people can truly learn from, and I think that that's a perfect place. I think that that's a perfect sentiment, which is if you're curious about those people in your life right now, how they're doing, or if you know that their experiences this year or last year or whatever, at whatever point in their life, have them in a place where that ebb and flow of grief, which is an ebb and flow biologically and emotionally. This isn't just them being dramatic or not letting go. This is just the way life is and the way our brains work and the way our bodies respond to big life events. And if you're curious how to show up for them, especially during the holidays when all likelihood they are experiencing it a little more, show up. Take that risk. Take the risk of showing up because I mean, I'd argue even if there's nothing you can do for me, I'd still rather have somebody who loves me sitting next to me.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
agree with that?
Fill up the house with warmth
And
and
casserole.
bodies, because if you're not there,
Yeah.
it's just the
It's just a lot of empty
space that's
space.
emptied from the person who's not there is a lot more obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I am so grateful that you found me. I have loved this conversation. I am going to be following your journey and I'm excited to read your book. I'm excited to hear your TEDx. You don't know yet when that's coming out, so we'll be sure to share that as well. Um and I'm really grateful for your courage and your ability to pivot really on your experience and instead of just sharing the heart of it, really truly sharing it in a way that makes space and creates hope for others because I think that that is just it's a courage that a lot of people don't necessarily. You know what, I don't want to downplay anybody else's experiences because not everybody's meant to do that, but I appreciate you and your ability to share that because it certainly connects with me and I am somebody who will take every opportunity for connection. So thank you so very much for having this
Well,
conversation
thank
with me.
you so much for having this forum to talk about difficult things that are not something that's everyone's cup of tea, and for being courageous and neutral, not like I use the word neutral when I talk about showing up for people, and
Hmm.
like, well, how should I be when I go knock on someone's door? Who's, well, just be like a vessel instead of
Hmm.
bringing your own, like, you don't need to be like sobbing, or you don't need to be like laughing either. Just read the space, but that like neutrality, that like just clearing for people to speak into is so important, and you're providing that with your show. So I really appreciate that, Kendra.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. So, everybody, please check in on those you love, reach out, show up for one another. It makes the world of difference. And also, again, touching back to what we said before the show, if you find yourself requiring some extra support here, please make sure that you reach out. I know this is a difficult conversation for many and one that we don't take lightly. So, take care of yourselves, please, and just reach out to those you love and take a moment to remind them they're not alone. Thanks so much.